In the absence of the physical presence of the board president today and the board vice president not being here, I'm going to call this meeting of the JMRL Library Board to order, and we'll entertain a motion for remote participation, actually two motions, one for Tony and one for Meredith. So let me pull those up. Board. And if somebody would make the following motion with the reason D.
I move that Tony Townsend's request to attend today's meeting, the JMRL board remotely due to a personal matter, specifically caregiving duties, be approved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And if someone would make a motion for Meredith's participation?
I'll read that too.
Roll.
I move that Meredith Cole's request to attend today's meeting of the JMRL board remotely due to a personal matter, specifically work obligations, be approved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Mr. President, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Sorry I couldn't make it out there today. Let's go first and look at the minutes for our January meeting. Did anybody have any corrections or comments or additions?
I move that these minutes be accepted.
All those in favor? Anybody opposed? All right, very good. Thank you. On to announcements.
I think the branch manager, Ophelia Payne, would like to say hello and welcome everyone today.
Great. Ophelia?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ophelia Payne. Welcome, you guys that are joining us through Zoom. I'd like to welcome you all to the Louisiana County Library. I'm happy to have you all here. If anyone would like to take a tour of the library after the meeting, you're welcome to do so. Again, welcome.
Thank you, Ophelia.
Thank you, Ophelia. David, anything else that you'd like to share? Any other announcements folks have?
No further announcements.
All right. Do we have any public comments? Don't see anybody in the room from the public. Anybody online, David?
If anyone online would like to make a public comment, please use the Zoom raise hand function now. No public comment today, Tony.
All right, great. So at our last meeting, we asked David to put together a fines and fees report data report on the various ins and outs and finances of our fines and fees such as they are. And in addition to trying to gather some information from like jurisdictions around the state. So I'll turn it over to David for that.
Okay. I'm asking Taylor or Brittany, if you see Martha pop up as an attendee, would you please chat me so that I can make sure she's brought in? And Ophelia, can you keep an eye out for Mr. McCotter in case he makes it today? Okay. So thank you all. They can't see it. Never mind. For giving me the opportunity to give this continuing ed today about fines and fees. So the board has talked about the logistics of fines and fees quite a bit over the last few months, years. You've seen continuing eds on potential funding sources to make up for a move away from fines and fees. We've talked about the Friends of the Library. We've talked about the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation. The board has moved software subscriptions out of the equipment budget into the operating budget. At the last meeting, as Tony said, the board tasked me specifically to gather and prevent and present this information. What were the goals of the libraries that made a move to get rid of overdue fines, and what did they accomplish? Did those libraries quantify data, provide evidence that it was successful? And then to provide a menu of a continuum of what JMRL could do if they decided to make a change about fines and fees. So let me just start by defining what JMRL and most public libraries throughout the country think of as fines. These are for late returns only, or for items that are renewed while they are overdue. So this is not for damaged materials or for lost materials. Pretty much every library that did away with fines and fees kept they did away with fines. They kept the fee structure for if something was lost or damaged. So we're not talking about losing books and then not getting the money back in to replace them. It's just the punitive overdue fines that we're talking about. I also will remind you that JMRL's situation is a bit unique here. The equipment fund is spelled out in our regional agreement between Charlottesville, Albemarle, Green, Louisa, and Nelson as being the money that JMRL takes in. It specifically mentions fines and fees, and it's used to pay for library equipment. So different libraries across the country have very different structures. That's the way it works at JMRL. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start here with the American Library Association's guidance on overdue fines. And this is kind of a little bit of a timeline. The next few slides are timing. Like, when did these changes start to happen? Where did they start to happen? How did they pick up steam? As the Council of the American Library Association on Monday, January 28, 2019 in Seattle, adopted a resolution on monetary library fines as a form of social iniquity. It was adopted as part of the ALA's policy manual that states monetary library fines create a barrier to the provision of library and information services. Libraries should examine policies and procedures, particularly those involving fines, fees, or other user charges, and actively move towards eliminating any that may create potential barriers to access or academic achievement. So you can go look at that resolution. I believe I have a link to it here. The key points are that monetary fines present an economic barrier to access. There's mounting evidence that indicates eliminating fines increases library card adoption and library usage. This is the language from that resolution. Monetary fines create a barrier in public relations and absorb valuable staff time applying, collecting, and managing dues. Monetary fines ultimately do not serve the core mission of the modern library. And the resolution urges libraries to scrutinize their practices of imposing fines on library patrons and actively move towards eliminating. So this was kind of the thing that every library in the country heard in 2019. And you started to see changes happening. We'll get to that in a minute. But so in the documentation that I looked at, the research that I did, mostly it was articles and statements from communities that were going fine-free and interested in going fine-free. There was not a whole lot of after-the-fact data one way or the other. So these are the types of things that were in press releases or news articles, or the reasons that libraries stated their desire to go fine-free. There's very little hard data after the fact, but I'll share what there is in later slides here. So these are more kind of philosophical underpinnings used for libraries making this move. Many of these were taken from a document that the State Library of New Jersey put out, the New Jersey Library Association. I'm sorry, not the State Library, the New Jersey Library Association. So there are points in favor why the library would consider removing fines, potentially increase card registration, potential increase in circulation, increases in the number of percentage of materials returned, potential increases in the number of students using the library for homework, potential increase in staff time used for patron-focused services after the fine handling was removed, potential increases in overall usership, positive association with the library among patrons, especially children and low-income community members who feel more welcome, benefits everyone in the community when all can access information, services, and materials at the library without fear of penalties, financial penalties. Rather than motivating prompt returns, fines discourage residents from borrowing materials altogether, especially if they are unable to return them during the library's open hours. And then fines disproportionately impact low-income residents, children, and families. Those who would benefit the most from the library's resources are thus discouraged from accessing them. A study in San Diego found that nearly half of the library's patrons whose accounts were blocked as a result of late fees lived in 2 of the city's poorest neighborhoods. Similar data was found in studies of La Crosse, Wisconsin, Salt Lake City, Utah, and St. Paul, Minnesota. The other side of that coin is arguments against removing late fines. Libraries have increasingly tight budgets that depend on revenue from many sources, including fine payment. There's a widespread belief that fines are an effective incentive to ensure that patrons return materials in a timely fashion. Libraries believe that they are teaching their patrons accountability and responsibility when fines are assessed for keeping materials past their due date. Some libraries have smaller collections. They rely on patrons returning materials when they're due in order to maintain consistent access to titles, especially popular titles. So left-hand side here is a kind of a national timeline for when major library systems started to go fine-free, and on the right-hand side is a Virginia timeline. So nationally, one of the first was Columbus, Ohio, which is a large metropolitan library system in 2017, followed by Salt Lake City, Nashville, 2018, Baltimore, Denver. Around that time, the ALA released that document that we referenced earlier, and then you start to see most of the major metropolitan cities went fine-free at some point in 2019 or beyond. I also found that quite a few libraries, including JMRL, did not charge late fees during COVID closures or during their COVID response, and many of them just did not resume it when they went back to full hours and full services. A little slower to adopt in Virginia, Richmond in 2020, our neighbors in the Valley Libraries, Augusta Stanton and Waynesboro in July of that year, Massanutten Regional in December, Fairfax, Williamsburg, Montgomery Floyd, Lynchburg, Central Rap, Virginia Beach. So those are pretty recent within the last few years. Here are the peer libraries that JMRL has identified and used for strategic planning in the past, both Virginia and nationally. And basically, without going through all of them, 32% overall, both of these together, still have fines. 68% no longer have fines. In Virginia, 22% still have fines. 77% no longer have fines. Nationally, it's 38% with fines. 61% no longer have fines. And that pretty much, as you'll see on the next slide, I think is what the national trend has been. About 60% of public libraries don't have overdue fines. The best source of information I found was from Library Journal's 2022 Fines and Fees Survey, where they sent information out to a number of public libraries throughout the state, throughout the country, got information back. And the first point there is maybe the biggest one. Compared to 5 years earlier, the percentage of public libraries charging patrons overdue fines dropped from 92%, so almost every library was charging fines, down to 36%. So this is a few years ago in 22, but about 64% of libraries were not charging. 60% of US libraries have automatic renewals, which is one of the things that we'll talk about on the menu for what are the options for JMRL. Libraries with auto renews generally see shorter late periods with more items returned within a week of their due date. All size libraries trended towards going fine-free, but large libraries serving populations of 100,000 or more were especially likely to have gone fine-free. You kind of saw that in that national. Now it's easier to find information about what Boston Public Library is doing than what some small town is doing, Altoona, Pennsylvania is doing. But at any rate, a quarter of the respondents said circulations in their libraries had increased. About the same said that it hadn't, and the other 50% said they didn't know. So it was hard to find real good, hard data here. You know, that's the type of information we got. And this is comments that came back to the Library Journal. Also, this is a good point. Comments indicated that those libraries were unsure whether circulation changes were because of changes in fine policy, the pandemic, or both. Libraries that charge fines, it's estimated that 12.9% of all borrowed items are returned late, down from 14.9% 5 years earlier, which also might have to do with automatic renewals. Libraries that collect fines are earning less revenue from them in 22 than in 17. The monthly median fell drastically from $500 to $200. 57% of respondents answered that fine revenue had decreased since 2019. Okay, so this slide and the next slide are pulled from literature that I could find. Again, most of what we got was mostly observational, subjective. There was not one big summary of quantitative data. A lot of local libraries, articles in the paper about what switches they made. So I tried to focus on the available information that had more than 6 months of data to share, but even that was limited. So it wasn't just like, oh, the first day we saw all these people come in. It was like a little bit afterwards. So here are a few examples. High Plains Library District in Colorado removed fines on everything except DVDs. They tracked their circulation. 6 months found that 95% of materials were being returned within 1 week of when they were due. They found no increase in patron disappoints, which is not something we're currently tracking. It's a scenario where someone's put a hold on an item, is waiting for someone else to return it. Their children's circulation increased 16% in the year after going fine-free. St. Paul, Minnesota, Gleason Public Library, Illinois, San Rafael Public Library, California reported hold times were virtually unchanged after eliminating fines. Milton Public Library in Vermont saw its on-time return rates actually increase. Salt Lake City did collect some good data. They found that materials returned late decreased from 9% with overdue fines in place to 4% after removing fines. They did have longer hold times after going fine-free. They attributed it to more people checking out items as the number of unique borrowers increased by more than 10%. They reported that immediately following the removal of fines, the checkouts rose 10%, the number of new cardholders rose 3.5. They had a 10% increase in both CIRC and unique borrowers in 1 year after eliminating fines. Vernon Public Library in Illinois saw the average number of days and items overdue fall 42%. Martin Public Library in Tennessee reports we don't lose as many items. Our loss rate's less than 1%. Patrons return their items on a more timely basis. In fact, 95% of materials are returned within a week of their due date. We have more patrons return to use the library. They're no longer ashamed to come to the library because of having items that were late. And a 60% drop in overdue items from the time they started this. 2000, that's not 2005. That time they had thousands of overdue items. That year they started mailing reminders, maybe it was, informed their patrons that fines had been discontinued. So Martin Public Library for 20 years. San Rafael, an increase in children's materials, a 40% increase in youth borrowers after dropping late fees just for children's materials. Chicago reports a 240% increase in returns in the first 3 weeks after removing fines. So that's not the same amount of time. Dayton Public Library reports that 6 months after removing late fines, they saw more than double the number of overdue items that were returned during the same period as the previous year. Denver Post did a 1 year later article that included the following bits. 35% of patrons with fines who had stopped using Denver Public Library services re-engaged. Denver librarians saw a 10% increase in lost materials being returned from 2018 to 19. In New York, the Brooklyn Public Library is seeing 25% more new card applications a year since October 21. That was in October 22. This is again from a 1 year later retrospective. New York Public Library, Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island experienced a similar boost in cards and circulations of branch materials, increased by over 2 million from fiscal year 22 to 23. At Queens, new card registrations have surpassed pre-pandemic figures by up to 31% some months. And the number of in-person visits have jumped by 47% since fines were abolished. So that's a lot of kind of random numbers. What about our neighbors here in Virginia? Stanton Library reports that prior to their fines change, about 7,300 patrons were blocked due to fines lost items. Currently, they're down to 1,600 cards blocked for that reason. JMRL currently has around 10,500 blocked cards. Massanutten Regional, which is around Harrisonburg, is reporting an 18% increase in usage, 24 over 23. They've been fine-free since 2020. They're also reporting a 6 times increase in card limits. At least 54% of libraries in Virginia are fine-free, and an additional 7% have no fines for kids' cards, which is what JMRL scenario is. Of the 13 jurisdictions that directly border and touch JMRL, and I included Stanton and Waynesboro within Augusta County there, even though they are their own separate library systems, only 4 charge overdue fines. Of the 17 Virginia regional library systems, 10 are fine-free. JMRL's closest comp is Central Rappahannock on the other side of the lake here, and they're just kind of the scenario here. Okay. So here's some information about what's currently overdue at JMRL according to our integrated library system. Some of the dollar amounts here are approximations because this is the system that manages checking materials in and out. It's not the actual cash registers collecting money. So 16,000 items are currently billed, which means more than 30 days overdue, valued at 300 grand. 56,000 current overdue fines on accounts, valued at 92,000. JMRL will waive any fine over $35 if the total amount's paid at once. So if you have $100 in late fines and you come in, we'll charge you $35 for it. 23,000 current overdue renewal fines, valued at $20,000. So that's the fine is for being late, and then they were renewed after that. 10,500 accounts currently blocked for excessively overdue or billed items. In 24, roughly $83,000 paid in overdue fines, 43,000 in billed and replaced items. So that 43,000 would not go away. And just an FYI, in 24, JMRL paid $5,200 for collection agency services. We contract with an outfit called Unique that sends messaging out to individuals that have late materials.
David?
Yeah.
I'm trying to respect your flow, which is great, but this one I think is an important one to really understand every part of it. So the first build is a lost item, is that correct?
Correct.
So that would not change under any proposal that we're talking about because
Correct.
we're not dealing with lost items. Similarly, the last bullet, are collection agencies ever used for fines, or is it only for lost items?
It is for excessive fines as well. Brittany probably
Dollar amount.
Sorry, go ahead.
What is the dollar amount for that?
I think that's either $35 or $45, and it's like 3 months, something like that.
Would you characterize that as mostly collecting the excessive fines or mostly collecting lost, or it's 50-50 or not sure?
I'd have to look that up. My
Okay.
gut says it's mostly lost items,
Yeah.
mostly billed items. So
Yeah.
they're not lost yet, but
Right.
the person hasn't returned them.
Well, and I think after 30 days, I'm just lost is just a conceptually easy thing for me to understand. We're sort of not thinking we're thinking it's not likely we're going to get it at that point. So that's why we moved to this billing.
Right. And when we moved to the collection agency, they were JMRL didn't have as much control over our notices that we sent out. They were all by mail at this point. This is 15 to 20 years ago. So we were printing, reams of paper. And they also, that Unique collection agency, used to credit report people for not following through with this. They no longer do that. I think that's not legal. But now JMRL has better control over our messaging. So I question the effectiveness of it at times, and I think our CERC manager does as well. It means something different to people to get something from a collection agency than it does from JMRL, but we can contact you via email or phone more frequently than they can.
I guess if I were, this is not necessarily the most important bullet on the screen, but if I were drilling down, I might ask, what was the collection amount that resulted from collection agencies, because that's
Yeah, they provide that information.
right. So not important right now. And then the 10.5 that are currently blocked.
Yeah.
Do you have a gut feel for what percentage of that is billed items versus excessively overdue?
I don't, but I can find that out.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So actually, to me, I learned more in this portion of the research than all the rest of it combined. This was just kind of comparing JMRL's own data we went fine-free in July of 2016 and the beginning of fiscal year 2017. That's the first time for children that there were no overdue fines. It's important to note that it's not for kids' materials, it's for kids' cards. So if you are a juvenile with a juvenile card, you don't have overdue fees. If you check out an adult book, there's no overdue fees. If you check out a kid's book, there's no overdue fees. If you're an adult that checks out a kid's book, you still have overdue fees. That was the decision we made at the time. So we're not tracking materials here. We're just tracking card holders. Also, right, COVID was a big disruption of services and of circulation patterns, and that happened right in the middle of this collection year. But in general, in fiscal year 16, prior to that fine-free for juveniles change, 89% of physical circulation went out to adult cards. 11% was checked out to juvenile cards. In fiscal year 17, the first year after removing fines for juveniles, 81% of checkouts were to adult cards, 19% to juvenile cards. So we saw a slight increase there, more materials going out, with a greater percentage of materials going out to juvenile cards. The overall CERC was down by about 1%, so it's pretty standard to be up or down 1%. And then last year, 63% of physical material checkouts were from adult cards and 37% were from juvenile. So that's quite a leap between fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 24 in the amount of juvenile cards being used, which could be could be parents using those cards because they're fine free. We know that's happening. That's happening everywhere. We also had in there, I forget the exact date, I should have looked this up. We changed the juvenile cards to now go up to 18 as well. It was 16 in 2016. So there's a couple more years of checkouts there. But to me, that was a pretty dramatic number there to see the overall piece of the pie being checked out by J cards to be that high. The overall patterns have also greatly changed since 17, and that year digital circulation was 6.2% of overall checkouts, and last year it was almost 30%. So maybe you can make the argument that, well, adults are using more digital materials. They're not checking out the physical materials that are eligible for fines. Physical circ on adult cards is down 35% since 2017, but physical circ on juvenile cards is up 61% from that year. Almost half of our physical checkouts last year were not eligible for overdue fines between digital checkouts, juvenile cards, and teacher cards, which was a very small piece of that.
And that will just keep going up because of the digital.
Yeah, it will be. As much as we can put into it, people will check it out. You're talking about digital.
Digital is eligible, but it just is automatic. It's self-enforcing, so it just doesn't, there's no fine.
There are no fines,
Right.
yeah. There are no fines available.
And maybe this is a future slide, but to this last bullet, between 17 and 24, what is I don't like to use this word revenue, but tell me what word is better. But the amount collected from the fines and fees source, how has that
I
changed?
don't have a slide for that, but I can find that.
Because obviously we absorbed that somehow because we're still here today. But
I don't have that. We could look that up, but anecdotally, I know it's a smaller amount collected now.
Yeah, but is it half? Does it track that closely? I guess it must.
Okay. So actually, this is my last real slide coming up. So these potential options. These are the things that the board has either heard about or discussed. First, make no changes, preserve the fine structure as is. Second is to remove all overdue fines. So that's the most common scenario that Library Journal survey found. Still blocking cards with excessively overdue items. So, you can't use the library if you have materials that you haven't brought back. But if you bring them back, you're free to use the library again. Continue to charge for damaged and lost materials. So that's kind of that's the traditional, we're going fine free. And this is what we do for juvenile cards now. Then there are kind of a sliding scale of things that could happen if JMRL wanted to address some of the reasons for the libraries that have made these choices. So that could be turning on auto renewals for all items without a hold. Basically, you could limit this to the maximum renewals allowed, currently 2, but we could change that. Staff are interested in this option as a potential customer service improvement, regardless of the board's final decision on fines. This might be something we should be looking at anyway. The only negative I've heard about auto renewals is that all items without a hold thing. So if you've got 5 books out and one of them has a hold on it, it's not going to auto renew. And if you get out of the habit of renewing your items or paying attention to the thing that says, hey, your things are due because they're automatically renewing, you might get caught in that. But that seems like a small trade-off and probably would only happen once or twice before you picked up the new system. Changing fine structures by item type. This is the least popular for staff that would have to work on this. For example, some libraries have kept fines for DVDs, but removed them for books or look at all the different item types that we have. I think we have way too many. We've got like 50 or 60 of them and figuring out like, okay, we want to charge for this, but not for that. Charge for this, but not for that. Changing the fine structures by patron type, which is what we did in 2017. So, for example, that would be removing fines on senior citizen cards as JMRL did with juvenile cards. That would be a little bit more logistically difficult because we don't currently have a senior citizen card and we already had kids' cards. So it was easy to do, just say, oh, take all those kids' cards and make them free. But it's possible. And then something that other libraries have done is implement regular and predictable forgiveness programs. So JMRL currently has one annual food for fines that happens around the holidays in December. and collect a tremendous amount of food. It goes to the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank, except here it goes to the Louisa Resource Council. And you can turn in a can to get some amount taken off of your overdue fines. In the past, we have done full amnesties. I remember a golden ticket program we did at one point 20 years ago. And I'm not sure how effective that was.
With everybody's approval, I note that we have the fines and fees discussion under new business after our policy committee report and our draft budget update. I'll just get a sense of, would folks like to discuss this now? In other words, move the new business item up and do those other two things later. I only mention this because the draft budget update has an impact on potentially getting rid of fines and fees. So we might want to do the policy committee report and the draft budget update and come back to this. I'm open to both options.
I'll share this presentation because I did include sources there if anybody wants to go read through them, but it was over. Anyway, it's a good time and time.
That's a wonderful accumulation of stuff, David. Thank you for doing that.
It's fun.
Sense from folks, do we want to continue discussing this? Do we want to hear about how the budget's going and come back to this?
Do you have a recommendation on how you'd like to proceed?
Yeah, I'll make an executive decision. Let's get the draft budget update and the policy committee report, and then we can come back to the fines and fees discussion. That's okay with everybody? We'll do that. Okay.
Aside from Louisa.
Okay, so
Okay.
we're moving forward.
Yep.
What's next on your agenda, Mr.
Draft,
President?
but the policy committee report is next. And you guys had a meeting, no?
Yes.
Okay, the policy committee met today before the full board meeting. And we most of our time was spent reviewing the bookmobile policy, which we've also invoked the broader concept of mobile library services. So we'll see how that lands with some language. We had some good progress in identifying some portions that are probably going to end up moving to procedural, but keeping the bullet points of what do we need as tools for our staff, what do we need to communicate to the public at a policy level. So we've got those bullet points. We'll have a draft that will magically be conjured into existence between now and our next meeting in 2 months, and we'll be looking at starting from a sort of a suggested revised version in 2 months. We also just introduced or opened up the employment references policy, and I think we'll probably have time to continue our discussion on that next month. No, and it's possible that, I'm sorry, not next month, next meeting, which is in 2 months. Depending on the level of detail that we get into with employment references, we may even in that same month, 2 months from now, have a proposal that's ready for the full board meeting later that same day.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike? If not, we'll move on to the fiscal year 26 draft budget update.
Okay, and actually, Brandy, to answer your question, the only jurisdictional partner that has discussed JMRL's proposal in a public meeting is Louisa County, right? And the Louisa County Board of Supervisors did vote to include full funding for library services in their initial budget at this time, which is great, but this is the first step where they're putting together a draft budget that's going to be voted on finally on April 21st. So we appreciate the support at this level, and Brandy and I are available if any county elected officials or staff have any questions about the process. Martha and I will be attending a budget work session with Greene County on March 11th. Other jurisdictions are just starting their work sessions. I gave you these dates last month, but some of them are coming up in the next few weeks. So the ones to keep an eye on are Albemarle County Executive's proposed budget is coming on this Wednesday. So we will know what staff is recommending to the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors for service. And Charlottesville and Greene are both next week with that. So we'll have a pretty good picture of where we are in the budget cycle and scenarios by the end of next week. Nelson will be a little bit behind on that. They usually don't vote on their budget until June. Final votes, May 7th for Albemarle, April 14th for Charlottesville, May 13th for Greene, and April 21st for Louisa. And that's all I have to report at this time, Tony.
So remind us in that draft budget report, David, where are fines and fees as a line item in that draft budget?
Currently, the only action that the board has taken is to remove the cost for the ongoing software that is in the equipment budget in order to have a soft landing spot should the board decide to make a change. But that's something that needed to happen anyway. Those were no longer equipment costs. They were ongoing operational costs. It'd be like the Zoom, the Zoom cost now is not a software. So the only budgetary impact is for that removal of the operating costs for that software from the equipment budget into the operating budget.
And a round figure for that dollar amount that we moved, 25?
I believe it was about $130,000.
Okay. All right.
Actually, I think I might have that.
That sounds about right.
It was in last month's meeting, minutes.
Yeah, that's the round figure.
Okay, right.
But to ask Tony the same question a different way, in the current budget, we have an equipment fund, and we're assuming that there will be some inflow as in previous years. Is that true?
We have not taken any equipment requests yet. They come in from branches in the beginning of March, but I am anticipating, kind of on the flip side of your flip side,
Yeah.
that there will be requests for equipment
Yeah.
that JMRL will need to fund.
And I'm not looking at the budget or remembering how the equipment fund portion of the budget works, but every year we collect a certain amount of fines and fees.
Correct.
And we allocate that towards, for the regional agreement, towards equipment requests. Does our current budget reflect an anticipated amount of fines and fees or revenue from that source? Or is this whole equipment fund not handled by the overall budget that goes to jurisdiction?
No, it's not in the overall budget that goes to the jurisdictions. It will go to the budget committee this spring, to our finance committee, and then the board will see it as part of the final, when the board votes in June on the library board's budget, the equipment budget will be appended to the back of it.
And the idea, again, is that for the regional agreement, it's just exclusive of, it's just outside of everything that flows through the jurisdictions currently.
Right.
Okay.
So, one way to look at that is that, Jerry pinned the number at about $100,000 in, again, not to use the phrase revenue,
Yeah.
but about $100,000 of money that came in for fines, and that may or may not include fees that were in there. So that's the number that would need to be replaced in some way.
If we, and then taking this slight tangent, if we've just moved $100K out of software out of equipment budget, and we get about $100K in every year, and we fund software plus other stuff, how that doesn't add up to me, because it sounds like the other stuff would be more than the.
Question, how are we gonna do that?
No, you're right. I didn't communicate that very clearly. In past years, we've running about $100K of income from fines and fees. And in past years, we've been spending, it sounds like, $130K for the software licenses, plus other things that are part of equipment. So that doesn't add up to me, because the $130K plus other things is more than the $100K that we're.
Yeah, we're gonna have needs. We're gonna have needs there.
But I'm saying, even in past years, when we did have the $100K of,
We needed more than fines.
we needed more than the fines to make the equipment budget work.
I think frequently we have underspent the equipment requests. There have been, we think it's gonna be this much for this thing, and we think shipping is gonna be this much, and throughout the year, the needs have changed or the costs have come in lower. And we had started with a fairly healthy balance there. I think, I don't have it in front of me, but it's in your monthly reports, what the current balance is there.
I
So
see.
we have a cushion that without going outside the library, we would be able to make this happen for a few years at least.
Yeah.
But the library is gonna have to come up with a plan.
Yeah, and my question is not even focused on the going forward. It's just like, how did, this doesn't add up, working backwards, because what I'm hearing is the expenses, including the software, were more than what we kind of typically get from the fines and fees. And I think what I've heard is somehow this cushion had built up and we were able
To
to
be
spend
clear,
it down.
any revenue coming in is going into the equipment fund. It's not just fines and fees,
Okay.
so.
I see.
E-rate reimbursement funding that comes in, the small amount of swag that we sell,
Yeah.
it goes into that. So it's not the only thing.
Okay, so that might be part of the
that's making up
disconnect.
fund.
As I'm not identifying those other revenue sources. Okay, thanks.
So that's a good segue into our fines and fees discussion. Uh,
I had a question, David.
Yeah.
And I understand the separation of fines and fees, and it may be easiest for making decisions at the moment to keep them separated. But for me, my interest in this issue came from that perspective of, creating barriers to use of the library. And in that sense, these are connected because they both create economic barriers to use the library. And I was just curious what the current policy is. Like, let's say that I borrow a book and I get some emails from the library that says, you haven't returned this book. And I say I did. Pretty sure I did. So you guys do a search and you can't find it, and there's no evidence I returned it. What is the policy there in terms of, is there forgiveness of like once, twice, 3 times, and what's the maximum I would have to pay for a lost book?
So when I was in Brittany's job many moons ago, it was the conversation would say, okay, we're gonna look in all the nooks and crannies at the library. I'm gonna look on the shelf, I'm gonna look at the book drop, I'm gonna look here and there. You should look in all the nooks and crannies of your house. The number one was always under the seat of the car, under the seat of the car, behind the couch, things like that. Take some time, kind of put a freeze on it so it's not accumulating fines and fees at that time. You go check, we go check, circle back again. We'll check with other branches, make sure it's not there. If it's just not there, then we do allow for a claims returned, where we say, okay, this person claims that they returned this item. Any staff is authorized to do that. We don't allow more than, Brittany's not here, but more than 2 of those per account, basically. So, if you come to us once and you say, I returned this, and we say, we believe you, but after X amount of times, you can't do that anymore. The maximum amount that we would charge for a replacement title is depending on the value of the title. So we charge a $5 processing fee too. So if it was a $7.99 paperback, we charge a $5 fee, it's $11.99. If it was a $60 coffee table book, we would charge $65.
And if the person doesn't claim it was returned and just acknowledges that I lost it, do they just have to pay the value of the book? Which could be high, right? Like it could be a few $100 easily.
You don't recall there was a threshold in there or not? Fines and fee schedule?
That's for the late fees.
There's no cap on
There's no
cost.
cap on material. If you lost 10 books, now if you called and said, we had a fire, my car got flooded, those things, then Brittany will work with you and we'll figure out solutions, But if it's just you ghost us and we never see you again, then the bill on your account. That's some of those numbers, those eye-popping numbers about what JMRL's current status is. That's the case. Somebody came in, they checked out a bunch of stuff, they never came back.
So, yeah, and so I'm happy to keep that separate from this discussion to keep things simpler, but I would like to revisit that at some point. For me, the specific story that got me interested in this was, I think it was a woman at a senior care facility, doing the Meals on Wheels program with the bookmobile. And, you know, there's more people involved in that situation where things can get lost that aren't, it's hard to figure out who lost the book in this, you know, handoff, this, you know, and you know, and there you're dealing with a community of folks who like have very little money, and a $30 or $100 fine is complete barrier to ever using the library again.
Yeah, all of our managers and certainly our circulation manager are empowered to listen to a human story and make a choice. So I'm not familiar with the exact scenario that you're talking about, but those types of things happen, and usually we can work something out. If that didn't happen.
Yeah, and it was like over a year ago, so I'm not sure of the situation, but it just like I just remember hearing that story and just thinking that sucks. Yeah, okay.
I'd like to also mention the concept of process simplification here, which you know, I'm always like to be cognizant of when we're doing anything as a library system. The and David mentioned this in some of his slides, the amount of money that you spend that you expend collecting X dollars, is that more than the money you take in? Okay, so again, would staff be freer to do these kinds of things? Would it be, and again, is that a barrier to people using the library if they have to remember that they have fines? I don't know. That's, you know, something I think about. But in terms of staff having to do the collection of fines and fees, I think that's also something to consider when we try and decide whether are we gonna keep this around or not.
And not just, it's a great point, and it's not just their time, but also I doubt it feels good.
Yeah.
I'd like to bounce off of those express. So I'm very open to all of this. To me, invoking Chesterton's sense, which Peter's nodding and maybe some other people will look up. There was a reason, it seems to me, why the fines were instituted in the first place. And it was, I'm not a professional librarian or MLS degree holder, but it probably had to do with, and this was in one of your slides, a tool to help ensure the efficient circulation of materials. I want to have as many people checking out materials as possible, but we got to have them back also so that they're available for other people to check out. So I'm concerned. I'm not viewing this actually from a revenue standpoint as much as I would want to. As we're doing this, I would want to make sure that we haven't impacted other important metrics about the operation of the library. From the information you've shown, it doesn't sound like anybody said, "Hey, we did this and it was a disaster and it was a problem."
We're not saying there was.
Right. Well, they're not be incentivized to do it either. You know, we kind of talked about that. So to me, to feel that we were proceeding prudently, I would want to define what those metrics, those performance metrics were, non-financial performance metrics. I want to make sure that we are collecting those in advance so that we can establish what the baseline performance is. B, continuing collecting those after any change. And then so that we could prudently understand, hey, was this a solution with no trade-offs? You know, a rainbow solution with no trade-offs? Or were there a trade-off that we need to be concerned about and understand the impact? And if we did that, I feel like that would be a much more prudent approach.
And Meredith had a comment.
Okay.
I just had a quick question, and I don't remember, excuse me if this was on your slide. Have we seen a big change in how late children's materials are returned since fines went away?
I did not have any information on that, and I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but I haven't heard anything about a problem with children's materials specifically.
And I am curious if the libraries that instituted this sort of went a little harder on reminders or something, because I think quite frankly, I mean, we all check something out and, you know, and occasionally forget the day that we're supposed to take it back, unless we've got a date to go to the library every week, you know, and then look at what our library materials are and figure out when they're due. And I am curious if there's some kind of, you know, gentle reminder system, because there must be something, or else how could these libraries that said they got rid of the fines actually get any materials back. I mean, we could all just, shelve them with our regular books and forget that they belong to anyone but us. I mean, theoretically.
Anecdotally, in a lot of those articles that I read, the libraries that were going fine free also instituted new kind of notification at the same time. So Kayla and I have talked about this a bit. JMRL does do a courtesy notice now before your items are due. And with the new LS starter, the new like notification package that we have a lot more flexibility to send as many notices as you want. Now, the caveat is that they're all or nothing. It's not going to be like, oh, for Louisa, you get these, and for the bookmobile, you get that. It's like everybody would get the same schedule. But that's probably something that regardless of what the board decides to do here, we're going to be reviewing that cycle to see, what makes the most sense for people.
Well, I mean, I think that as someone who's in one of your high percentages of digital users, since that's mostly how I read library materials these days, I do enjoy the fact that I get kind of a little bit of a countdown, and I get a little reminder, say like your materials are going to disappear, in 2 days. So if you haven't read this book yet, you might want to get on it. And that kind of stuff. So, I could see sort of sending out little reminders before something was due to let people know.
Guarantee somebody else out there doesn't want to see those things. The problem that we usually have though, Meredith, is people don't read the content of them. They just see they see, oh, something from the library, and they think, oh, my book is here, or oh, my books are overdue. And they're not actually drilling down into them to see, what the scenario is. But yeah, certainly I think that we could.
That might be changing your subject line of your emails might be helpful that way. But I think that what I think you were getting at in the very beginning of the discussion, and then I'll stop talking because I'd love to hear what other people have to say, is that removing fines sort of removes that adversarial relationship with the library. So if I'm sending you an email now, I'm really more of like a gentle, concerned neighbor. Like, did you read that book? Would you like to bring it back? Because some other people, Tony would love to read it. And so it'd be great if you could bring it back. And I think that kind of gentle guilt is working on some of these, because I don't think anyone really comes into the library thinking I'm just going to steal all these things. I think they really have a great intentions of reading the material and getting it back. And if I now don't see the people at the checkout desk as someone who are like, you owe $35 and so you can't check anything out, but more people who are like, hey, did you enjoy the book? Thanks for bringing it back. Now someone else can enjoy it. That's a different relationship. So.
And I think the other Charlottesville representative who is not Meredith or Ann has a question.
Is that me?
Yeah, that's you.
Okay, cool. This is like just a newbie question. Are we coming to a decision today? Because I know you had a slide that had options. Are we just discussing and this is coming back? Okay, I just wanted to be clear about what's happening.
On the discussing note, I personally like the fact of auto renewals, and having recently had an auto renewal in my inbox is Jefferson Madison Regional Library courtesy notice. If the book's not on hold for somebody else for wanting to read it, to have at that point, okay, on this date, we're going to go ahead and renew your book. Or, hey, this book's been on hold, so if you can have it back to us on 2 days from now, would be a nice way to like kind of.
I'm
in favor of that.
I'm very much intrigued by Meredith's sort of cultural shift here. That we're the good neighbor approach rather than the adversarial approach. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of background that would need to happen to be able to do that. But I like that idea that the library wants to work with you, and it wants to work with all of its patrons. It wants to be the good neighbor that makes as many materials available as possible. So we'd really appreciate it if you could do this type of thing. I mean, it's not going to work for everybody, obviously, but it seems to me a nice thing to do, and you can couch promotional materials in that regard as well. So anyway.
And there's a significant one-time PR opportunity, right?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
I do want to co-sign Mike's point about evaluation. I also like evaluation, so I think that, I think that would be a key to it.
To me, this was gonna be my sort of suggestion for today. Establish a working group that will define these metrics, because I can say, every time I say a metric, I hear, oh, we don't collect that, or oh, that's hard to collect, or our system is written in COBOL or whatever. So we don't need to do that in this meeting, right? But a working group to kind of hash out what would be the performance metric that we care about. And I would collect that for a baseline for a while as we're working out some of these other budget logistical things that we've been doing. I would suggest, I'll just put it on the table in this framework, PR this as a pilot program. We're going to have a pilot program and we're giving this a try as we evaluate the impact. And then everyone will know that we're doing it in a prudent way. And then it's pilot program is going to last a year or whatever. Probably a year is good because you'll have the seasonal baseline to compare with. And then a year later, you get another PR. Hey, it worked. Or hey, we had some impacts, so we're going to make some tweaks and go from there. But that's where my thinking is right now.
If I'd known you were going to say working group, Mike, I might not have co-signed.
Yeah, I think the idea of a working group is good, and I think maybe 2 trustees and 2 staff folks, and maybe an ex officio member, it would be good with a Mike. What would be a good time frame, do you think, for such a group?
To actually kind of define these and collect.
Right, and come back with recommendations to the board.
Doesn't seem like it would necessarily take more than 2 months, other than, I guess, the only area where we get into a longer time frame in my mind, and again, I'm just off the cuff, is if we all agree, if the working group all agreed that performance metric X was really important, but we don't have that instrumented today, so we're going to have to invest in some sort of new, move from COBOL to C or something, from some subsystem, then that would take more time and energy. But
how do other folks feel about a working group?
And is this too much trouble or too much effort, too much energy to invest in the sort of measurement? That might be something that comes out also.
Tony, can I check to see if this, Alita, is that you on the phone here?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So Alita has been listening, and if she has opinions, now's the time.
Well, I like the idea of the working group and also the pilot program too. So because if you go into it, just jump, we're going to just not have these fines, and then it doesn't really work out as well as you thought. At least if it was a pilot program, you can say it didn't work out like we thought, so we're back to fines.
Any other thoughts on establishing a working group?
And
I don't
the
have
working
an opinion on the working group, but I do want to just voice a word of caution on the idea of framing it as a pilot. I think that number one, my sense is that we're going to have to pitch the jurisdictions on this financial shift, and doing things like we'll just do it for a year and then change back seems complicated. The other thing is that if you tell people you don't need to pay fines for a year and then you change back, it's going to create a ton of ill will. So this to me does not strike something. I feel like you could right, like you could sort of say, oh, in addition to children, we're now going to do elderly, but hold off on, like you could do something like that. But I don't feel like you can give and take away without a lot of ill will created.
I agree with that. I would recommend not doing a pilot program and really just studying.
Well, I think
get rid of
people
fines.
have done pilots. They understand the idea of a pilot, and if if during that pilot time you're communicating with them, I think I think they can understand and maybe will work with you harder.
It seems to me like the trajectory of this issue, fines is very heavily leaning towards that fines are they're simply obsolete, really. We've already gotten rid of them for juveniles. And more adults are doing digital, so I would really, I think we need to really resolve this one way or the other. I do think ultimately there, and I saw it in one of your slides, there is an overall, incentive to bring your books back if you lose your card. And I know from my daughter, who has 4 kids and up in McLean, she has had her card revoked a couple of times, and that is a huge incentive to get it in your head that you got to bring these books back. So, and she said, I talked to her about this issue, and she said, there has to be some incentive to remind a family that they got to bring these books back. So I think we just need to keep that in mind too. But I think the fine, that's not an incentive for them. So, but losing your card is a huge incentive. So anyways.
Or just a suspension. It's not necessarily have to revoke. You can just say, yeah, okay, yeah. You can't check out anything new because some threshold has been met.
Yeah. And I think you have that already you must have that.
That's the case now.
Yeah, you could lower it. You can lower the threshold. Working group can talk about this. Yeah.
I'm not tied to a pilot or not, but I do think that there's benefit in being able to like tell a complete story through the evaluation piece to be able to sort of speak to what the impact of the change is. And maybe even to share that with other organizations. To your point, David, not everybody, it seems, has done that step. And we know, things change. So it doesn't seem, it doesn't seem like it seems like it could be helpful for us and then also helpful for a broader sort of library community to have a sense of that. And then the only other thing I would say is if there is going to be a working group that's looking at how we sort of measure success or progress towards a certain outcome, I don't know if we have articulated what the outcomes are that we're looking for, or maybe they've been intimated, but like, I would say I will volunteer to be on said working group. And I would like to have that kind of information as a.
I think that's in my mind, that's part of the goal of the working group is to define what that even is, like what those.
And then bring it here.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we have we have 2 volunteers for the working group. And David, if I think this is good, and I think, Anne, to your point, I think what we're really looking at here is, and what I would like the working group to come back with is not only how do we measure this, but what's the plan to implement this? Because I think pretty much we're all in agreement that this is something we're going to do, but there are lots of gray areas and gradations that we could choose. And David's slides point that out, that not everybody just says, hey, we're not charging overdue fees anymore. Keep them as long as you want. Obviously, nobody's doing that. So I think we would ask the working group to not only give us a plan for what we would charge, not charge for, and then also have metrics that we'd be able to evaluate 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever. And also to be thinking about a PR campaign. And David, I would think that maybe the staff on said working group could also, be helpful with what kinds of things you'd want to promote, what kinds of communication you'd want to get out there.
Tony, one of your earlier questions was about timing. I mean, to me, it makes sense to line this up with a fiscal year first, and a calendar year second. So I guess it kind of depends on, how fast the working group comes up with a recommendation and what that recommendation is.
Well, Mike volunteered 2 months. Look at that.
We also increased the scope a little bit. Yeah. My 2 months was to come up with what the metrics are, but, yeah, we'll meet and, let you know what we think. How's that?
So I would think, I'm assuming I'm being volunteered for this working group, and I probably will also volunteer on the call today are Brittany and Kayla.
Right. I think that sounds good to me. That sounds good to everybody else.
Manager and our head of IT and whatnot.
I would like to volunteer as a non-Charlottesville area person.
I think
Admiral.
then ideally you want 2 trustees. We could do 3. It just means it's a public meeting at that point, and you gotta,
Right.
you can't.
Yeah, and really all that means is we have to warn it. Is that right?
I'm sorry, we have to what?
We have to warn it as a public meeting?
Yeah. And we have to physically congregate somewhere that people can get to.
Right. That's fine with me. Brady, I'm happy to have you on that as well. Okay.
Brandon Mike's here. Yeah, that's a good point about representing the
Yeah.
jurisdiction.
Very good discussion, people. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We move on to the library director's report.
Okay, I'm just making sure I've got this here. So the working group, Mike, Siri, Brandy, myself, Kayla, and Brittany, if they're available for it. Brittany already texted me she's available. And we will try to get together before the next board meeting to at least have here's how we're gonna handle this. Okay.
Yeah, to come up with a framework and report back at the next board meeting how things are going. Is any other board resource or staff resource needed to make the working group viable? You can certainly do that before the board meeting. You don't have to wait for the board meeting to say, wait a minute, we need more, we need more help here type of thing. I think that makes sense.
Okay, if it's on to my report, I wanted to share with the board some book repair stats from calendar year 2025. So these are almost entirely volunteer numbers here that I got from our Uber volunteer at Gordon Avenue and Northside and Central, and then asked for from everybody else. 291 books repaired and returned to the collection at Green, mostly volunteers. 823 at Gordon Avenue, 996 at Northside, 2,999 at the Crozet branch, the volunteer team of 6 that works on that.
Just 25?
This is 1 year, yeah. 3,000 books they repaired, came in with some damage.
It's only the end of February.
No, I'm sorry. 2024, yes, last year. Yes, thank you. 231 in Scottsville with some staff assistance, 75 in Louisa, a total of 5,415 returned with a value of $81. So when we talk about our collection and, like what we need to do to get books out there, I think it's important to recognize those volunteers and give them their own time and energy to learn how to repair these materials and get them back out there. Another thing, this is almost more of a future agenda items, but JMRL did receive a 3rd distribution from the Hartman estate, which we have discussed twice before. I will bring a suggestion and a motion to the board next month, just so you all are aware that there is a check on the way to JMRL that for the previous 2, we had placed them in the endowment and had some discussion about that. And that will happen again next month. JMRL's 2nd annual Teen Poet Laureate contest is open. It runs from last Saturday through Sunday, March 30th. A panel of judges made up of library staff, school librarians, local authors and poets, and the current Teen Poet Laureate will select a winner who will be announced at an awards ceremony at the Central Library on Monday, April 28th at 6:30. All forms of poetry are welcome. So if you know any teen poets, send them to JMRL. The same page reminder, I distributed the books to you all. And I'm just passing out now for those in the room, the brochure for the events that are happening, kickoffs at every location, book clubs, author talks. Again, the book is Chesapeake Requiem by Earl Swift. And the big event is going to be at the Virginia Festival of the Book on March 20th. And last but not least, I'll remind trustees or inform trustees who weren't here at this time last year that every year in the spring, each branch closes for a staff training day. So we will have closures, not at the same time. They're all on different days, but between now and the end of May, where staff will have training. Ophelia, yours is 8/18. We were talking about CPR before you all arrived, so. The dates that we have at this point are up on jmrl.org. That's all I have to report today, Tony.
Thank you, David. Other matters, things people want to discuss and bring up? I'll make mention of the fact that we are in green next month, March 24th. And don't worry, we'll remind you again, but yeah, we are. We'll be in Greene County next month. Items on the agenda, we'll have a report, I hope, from the working group, which I guess we can call that the fines and fees working group, I guess. We'll have a report there, another budget update, I'm sure.
Tony, as a reminder that the board's calendar says that there's a self-eval next month.
Okay, yep, there'll be a soft evaluation of director goals next month. Is that right?
For the board.
Board goals.
Board self-evaluation, yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll get those out before the board meeting so that we can have that available at the board meeting. All right. Anything else on the agenda for next month? Okay. If not, may I hear our motion to adjourn?
Moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see everybody in green next month.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Be there.
And Ophelia is available to give a quick tour of the building if anybody wants to take a walk around, see what's new.